Hello folks and welcome to the TF1 show. I'm your host, Tinas Ferreira, your trendy hairdresser that tames the bushiest of bushy curls that is the world of Formula 1. Now, fellow Formula 1 friends, I think it is fair to say that we all are still recovering from an absolutely brilliant Austrian Grand Prix, and this race was just what F1 needed. It was like a stick of ginger up the metaphorical horse's bottom. Even practice was dramatic with Verstappen, Bottas and Vettel spinning off and rushing towards, some ludicrous wall on the Austrian Grand Prix track. And it was just absolute chaos, I tell you. And it was exciting from first practice right up until the final moments of the race. So please join me as I take you all along my recap of the wildest ride of the 2019 season so far. But before we get to that, let's discuss my predictions for the TF1 Stats Corner. I will once again bow my head deeply in humility and humiliation, since my predictions clearly didn't predict Mercedes to actually perform worse over one lap than what they did 1 year ago. When looking at the tracks correlated most highly with Austria, I found that both the Spanish Grand Prix, so similar to last week in France, and also the Australian Grand Prix right at the beginning of the year were quite well correlated with what we saw in Austria. So a quick summary of more or less what I predicted. So I predicted Mercedes was going to be in front, with Ferrari, Red Bull and Haas being close behind. A very, very tight midfield as expected, with Toro Rosso, McLaren, Renault, Alfa Romeo and Racing Point more or less being in line, and then obviously Williams bringing up the rear. I've once again done a bit of thinking into why my predictions aren't working as well yet. And I think definitely the 2019 tyres are still playing a role, where different teams are struggling across different races to actually get the tyres to work for them. So for example, a race like Spain, where Haas did incredibly well there because they were able to get the tyres to work, does not necessarily mean that Haas will perform well in a place like Austria, where, we saw that in the race how that went for them, just because they don't yet have a complete handle of how to get the tyres to work at every single race. Similarly, I think Mercedes definitely underperformed during this race, and they admitted as much. The altitude and the temperature was not friendly to their car, and I think they weren't able to really show their true pace over the weekend, which I think is a shame for them. Now, Ferrari and Red Bull and even Haas with Kevin Magnussen was quite accurate in terms of qualifying. McLaren, Renault and Alfa Romeo, they were predicted to be close, and given their upgrades, this was still the case. Racing Point and Williams was predicted to bring up the rear, and surprise, surprise, they did end up being the two slowest teams overall, along with Toro Rosso, who was probably the one team that was quite wildly mispredicted in terms of overall pace. So I think definitely the next step in this process will have to be to include a variable that allows for recent form compared to the rest of the teams. So just more or less to allow for the fact that teams are sort of improving their cars in comparison to the rest of the teams over the different races. So for example, a team like McLaren and Renault brought substantial upgrades recently, and you would expect maybe them to do a bit better than, for example, what they did in Australia. Because, using Australia as a predictor will lead to weird things happening, since that was right at the beginning of the year, where a lot of the teams were still getting to grips with a whole host of things on their cars and how their cars work with the tires. So a lot of water has flowed under the bridge since then, and I will definitely endeavor to incorporate something like that. But don't fear, dear listeners, the TF1 Stats Corner's predictions might have been as successful as Max Verstappen's start today, but like the young Dutchman, I will come roaring back in a blaze of glory and confetti. So please watch this space. Okay, let's get into my multitude of thoughts about the past weekend. Firstly, I think Austria, what a beautiful track and a beautiful setting, and it just delivers brilliant races. It's a true gem of a race in the calendar. I can remember Hamilton and Rosberg fighting in Austria a few years back. Last year's race was super exciting as well, and then this year was, I think, definitely the cherry on top. An absolute, the race of the season, I think, along with Bahrain, I would say. But yeah, it was just so fun to watch. There was, however, a bit of controversy with regards to the track. They had some yellow curbs on all of the corners, the runoff, on the sides of the corners to the track, which sort of looked like sausages. So they called them these sausage curbs. And it was a bit of a mess when, the F1 cars drove over those curbs at speed, because it was just front wings breaking off left, right, and center. It was like a carbon fiber horror film. And, some of the teams were complaining about the fact that their cars kept braking, and they felt that these curbs were unreasonably harsh. But I think that's nonsense. I mean, the curbs are supposed to indicate where the track limits are. So the curbs are indicating basically where you as a Formula One driver should not be on the track. So don't go there and complain that they break your car. It's simple as that. You're not supposed to be there, so don't go there and complain if your car ends up being broken. Okay, let's move on to the drivers and the teams and talk a bit about how they did the past weekend and all of the meaningful insights we can gather out of what happened. I guess we'll have to begin with the man of the moment, so Mr. Max Verstappen, who once again showed up in Austria and raced his way to victory. Last year he got a bit lucky with Mercedes reliability, but this year it was all him. His speed on those hard tires over the last third of the race was frightening. I mean, he was way, way quicker than anybody else. He also did really well to put his car third in qualifying, beating Valtteri Bottas in his Mercedes for third place. So that in itself was already a very, very good achievement. So if you watch the race, Max Verstappen got a horribly poor start. He basically went into anti-stall, which is a measure that the car has, or the engine has, that basically prevents the car from stalling. So he had some problems with getting his engine revs up. But, regardless, the Red Bull was still in his hands, and it came alive immediately after he got off the line. Before you know it, he got past Kimi Raikkonen in 6th and Lando Norris in 5th, Raikkonen in 7th and Norris in 6th, and he was back to catching Sebastian Vettel for 5th place at the time. I think he was out and out the fastest guy on the track I think after Ferrari's decision to make a bizarre second pit stop for Sebastian Vettel, and after Lewis Hamilton broke his front wing, it was basically a 3-horse race with Verstappen, Bottas and Charles Leclerc competing for the race victory. However, Valtteri Bottas was basically looking like a duck wading through peanut butter, and he had no pace at all. So Verstappen was past him in a flash, and then began the hunt for Charles Leclerc, Leclerc's race up to that point was so serene. You could put a Mongolian monk in that car and he would have appeared agitated and nervy in comparison to poor old Charles Leclerc. But Verstappen took massive chunks of time out of Leclerc's lead, and in the third last lap, I think he tried an overtake into turn 3, which didn't come off. However, the next lap he tried the exact same thing, and he took the inside line of the corner. He neatly ran Leclerc out of racetrack, who then had to go over those pesky yellow sausage curbs, and Verstappen was off with the race victory in his hands. It was quite a daring move and not without controversy. So for those who don't know, Verstappen's move on Leclerc for the race win was referred to the stewards, and they basically took half a century to review and to decide whether a penalty was to be handed out or not. So about 2 hours after the race finished, the stewards came and announced that they do not think that they're going to penalize Max Verstappen, and that he will be allowed to keep the race victory. Now, according to me, I think technically within the letter of the law, there might have been an argument to make for giving Max a penalty. But I feel in the greater scheme of things, and especially given what happened in Canada, I think the stewards made the right decision here. I think the move was marginal. So I think if you are super conservative and super, strict according to the rules, you could have handed out a penalty. But to be honest, the move itself wasn't all that unreasonable. And I think given the fallout that that the stewards received from Canada, from the F1 community in general. Also, given the fact that, the stewards came out at the beginning of the year and they said that they will be more lenient in terms of judging sort of racing incidents like this. And then also you need to consider that Charles Leclerc did make a bit of a tactical error there during that whole skirmish, where he allowed Max Verstappen to put his nose on the inside of that corner and make a dive, and then allow basically Verstappen to take control of the corner and run Leclerc out of road. I think if you go and watch past battles between Lewis Hamilton and Nico Rosberg, you'll see a lot of this happening where technically, I guess, the outside line, Leclerc might have felt that, Verstappen was quite far back, and taking the wider outside line meant he had more traction and a better exit out of the corner to get more speed during the next straight to keep Max behind there. But, he left the door open. Leclerc left the door open and Verstappen walked into the door and then basically slammed the door shut in Leclerc's face. And I think that's maybe something that Charles Leclerc needs to go back and analyze and think whether next time he's in a battle like this, even though the inside line might not be the optimal line given his preferences, just closing the door and not allowing Max Verstappen or someone as adventurous as Max Verstappen a look in is probably going to be the better decision. And I also think, given that the decision took so long, just as an aside, I've seen islands being formed more quickly than what it took the stewards to decide whether to allow the penalty or not. And, they did come out, the stewards, and sort of explain why it did take them so long. That the drivers had media commitments and it happened so close to the end of the race. They didn't have time to review it before the race was finished. And, they really had to take a considered decision, given the fallout from Canada 3 weeks prior. But yeah, I don't know. I can't imagine why it would take them so long. I mean, they had to hear from the drivers as well, but I don't think the drivers would have given them any new information that they didn't have beforehand. But anyways, I digress. Given that it took so long for the stewards to decide, I think it would have been horrible for Charles Leclerc's first ever victory in Formula One to be decided by a committee 2 hours after the podium celebrations were done. And then, he basically gets a piece of paper telling him, oh, well, congratulations, you've won your first race. I think given all of this, the outcome of this investigation and of the penalty is a positive one. I think the best man won on the day. Obviously, we all feel horrible for Charles Leclerc, but his day will come. And, Max Verstappen, he made it happen. If you make it happen, you deserve to win. And I think this is a true standout season so far for Verstappen, and he's really cementing himself as the top talent for the future of Formula One. And then I think we need to quickly move on to Newton's third law that says that for every action there must be an equal but opposite reaction, which, given Max's heroics, neatly brings us to the equal but opposite reaction of Pierre Gasly's race in Austria. Now, guys, Red Bull Racing dropped Daniel Kvyat the race after he brought them their first podium of the year in 2016. Also, Daniel Kvyat matched Daniel Ricciardo for the whole of the 2015 championship. Now, I don't necessarily think that firing a driver halfway through the season is correct, but given Red Bull Racing's history, I will be very surprised if Pierre Gasly is still in the car by Spa, especially if he doesn't get some kind of magic potion to solve whatever is going on. I mean, he was lapped by his teammates, and they were a line astern. They were literally, I think, 8th and 9th during the first lap, with Verstappen and Gasly literally driving on the same piece of track. And, 71 laps later, Max Verstappen was an entire extra revolution, of the track ahead of Pierre Gasly in the same race car. It must obviously speak of Max's talent, but I mean, if you're Pierre Gasly, it can't go on like this. And I think, even Red Bull, they've sort of been supportive of Gasly, and they've been trying to keep building him up and saying, no, it'll come. He's really working hard, he's trying hard. But even the Red Bull, they're running out of excuses. I think they are struggling to justify why Pierre Gasly is performing so badly in comparison to his teammates. Because, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen, but Gasly's tenure at Red Bull is the biggest anticlimax since McLaren Honda said they were going to win championships together in 2015. He qualified in 9th versus Verstappen's 3rd, and then he was beaten by a McLaren on pure pace. Lando Norris finished ahead of him, and this must just all defeat Christian Horner to no end, which, given my feelings toward Christian Horner, is not necessarily a bad thing. Lastly, I think we can also then mention that this result must be extremely encouraging for Red Bull and Honda. And I think if we can get the top 3 teams this close every race, we'll be having the best time every Sunday. Simple as that. Okay, let's move on to Ferrari. Now, I think this was a better weekend for them, with Charles Leclerc taking a brilliant pole position, although Vettel had a bit of a pneumatic issue in one of his side pods. I'm not sure exactly what it related to, but it basically meant that he couldn't participate in the third part of qualifying, and Vettel started in 10th place. Well, I mean, Vettel actually drove quite a decent race to finish 4th. He overtook a limping Hamilton with some difficulty after making another pit stop. So here I got a bit confused. So Ferrari, for some reason, decided that starting their cars on the less durable soft tire for the beginning of the race is going to be a better strategy than what Red Bull and Mercedes followed, which was to start on the harder medium tire. And initially it seemed to work quite well for them. However, I think they do now, in hindsight, need to, I think, decide or come to the conclusion that starting on the soft was maybe not the best idea. Mainly because I think Charles Leclerc ran out of hard tires over the last 5 or so laps of the race, which obviously allowed Max Verstappen to close up a lot more quickly. And then secondly, Vettel ran out of tires even more quickly than that, or I would assume he ran out of tires because Ferrari had to pit him for a second time, which then meant he had to, catch up to Hamilton all over again and repass him. And I do feel that Vettel might have been able to pull out a bit of a better race and at least give Max Verstappen and Charles Leclerc a run for their money as well. But anyways, I digress. Charles Leclerc, what a horrible pity. I mean, his first victory was snatched away in Bahrain, and 2 laps before the end of this race, Verstappen bulldozes his way past. Given how it all played out, and I did mention this earlier as well, I do think that him winning the race based on a penalty handed out 2 hours after the finish would have been horrible in itself, especially given that it would have been his first ever race win in Formula 1. I mean, I think all drivers dream of standing on the podium, having just won their first race, and just the whole situation would have been very unpleasant, I think, for Ferrari as well. But what we can now say is that Charles Leclerc is now firmly no longer a number 2 driver at Ferrari. He was consistently faster than Vettel for 2 race weekends and has shown brilliant improvement in qualifying as well as the race. I'm sure Mattia Bonotto can see a massive migraine coming in the distance, with team orders probably not being far off as well. Another positive for Ferrari is it seems that they are heading in a positive direction in terms of their car development. However, I think Austria was always expected to be a bit of a strong track for them, but I hope they can be this close every race weekend, and Silverstone, the next race, might be another strong track for them, so let's see what happens. Okay, let's talk about Mercedes. So Lewis Hamilton qualified in 2nd with Valtteri Bottas in 4th. Hamilton then got a 3-place grid penalty, which by some ridiculous and convoluted maths meant that he started in 4th position and not 5th position. If any of you are wondering how that happened, please just go online and look for a video that explains why, since I quite frankly do not have the time nor the patience to explain why this happened. So in qualifying, I think Hamilton pulled a bit of a rabbit out of the hat on his last lap. He found 0.6 of a second on such a short track, which is a massive improvement, to go second ahead of Max Verstappen and to squeak past Bottas in fourth, who, in all honesty, seemed like the faster driver throughout the weekend. So it was a typical sort of Hamilton qualifying surprise at the end, where I think Valtteri Bottas was a bit surprised. I think the most surprised probably out of all of us. Now the race for Mercedes was quite literally a hot mess, where the cars overheated and resulted in both Bottas and Hamilton cruising around the track without ever threatening to overtake anybody. Now, this is obviously a pity, since it could have been a proper three-way fight between Ferrari, Mercedes and Red Bull, especially since Mercedes technically did have the pace to compete. They just couldn't use it, because whenever they started pushing the car, their engine overheated, their brakes overheated, their tires overheated. I don't know what was going on there, but yeah, I mean, a real pity that we weren't able to see a real, three-way fight for the title, or for the race win, albeit. Hamilton broke his front wing, which meant Bottas was saved against a potential battle against his teammates, which I think he was glad about, to be honest, because it's not been going well for Valtteri against Lewis over the past few races. So maybe this will revitalize him and re-strengthen him to come back at the British Grand Prix and put in a real good performance. So all in all, it was a bit of a weekend to forget for Mercedes, and it does show that they are fallible, even though they are probably going to be back at Silverstone, terrorizing poor Ferrari and Red Bull from the front. McLaren, what a wonderful, wonderful weekend for them again. Lando Norris was this week's little engine that could. He raced wheel to wheel with Hamilton for the first lap, and then he passed Kimi Raikkonen to park himself in 6th place, beating the Red Bull of Pierre Gasly in the process. Not that that is such a big achievement anymore, but I guess just having the fact that you were able to beat one of the Red Bulls, on straight race pace is, I guess, an achievement for both Lando Norris and for his McLaren team. Now, Carlos Sainz was my driver of the day along with Max Verstappen. He started way down the grid and he fought his way through the whole midfield to finish 8th, which I think is an incredible achievement and a testament to the fact that McLaren is now definitely the best of the rest. If McLaren can make a few more gains, especially in race trim, they are not going to be too far off from knocking on the door of the top 3 teams, but I guess that's just me dreaming for now. Another very, very good weekend for Alfa Romeo again. 2 good weekends in a row. They did very well in France and now very good in Austria as well. Kimi Raikkonen is still driving so well, and he's a constant in the top 10 throughout the race. And a double Q3 performance for them, with Kimi Raikkonen qualifying in 7th and Giovinazzi qualifying in 8th. And I think we can all applaud Antonio Giovinazzi for scoring his first ever championship points, and that must be a large weight off his shoulders. And I think Alfa Romeo, they also seem to have a bit more of a consistent car now, and I really do hope they can keep it up for Silverstone, because then I think we're going to see a real tussle for the best of the rest there. Speaking of tussle and speaking of best of the rest, I think, to ask ourselves, what happened to Renault this weekend? They were all, glamour and glitz and celebration last week in France, where their upgrades seemed to work really well, and they got quite a decent performance, but this weekend must have been a real head scratcher for them. They didn't have any pace the whole weekend long, and it doesn't seem like they actually know what went wrong. Daniel Ricciardo and Nico Hülkenberg were both extremely confused and perplexed, and it was just a bit of an odd weekend, and we didn't really hear about them during the race at all, since they were just stuck in about 12th and 13th place, trying to find some sort of hope or some happiness there way down the field, and I don't think they were able to find either. But let's hope they figure out what was going on, since this race was un disaster for the French team. Now Haas, I think I can sum up their weekend in a sentence, and the sentence goes like this. Brilliant qualifying, but a race that will make Lemony Snicket and his series of unfortunate events proud. They had no race pace. Imagine qualifying 5th and 11th. Grosjean underperformed there a bit, but Kevin Magnussen drove an incredible qualifying lap to qualify in 5th place overall. And then they ended up finishing 16th and 19th in the race. Now, how in the world does that happen? Kevin Magnussen did get a drive-through penalty for being a bit naughty, but to be honest, even a drive-through penalty doesn't result in such a shocking fall from grace like this. And I really don't know even what to say here, except I do hope that they figure out what is going on, because there's obviously some fundamental problem transferring the car's performance from qualifying into the race, because it's the strangest thing how they can just literally fall back. Cars just start overtaking them left, right and center as soon as the race starts, even though they have a fundamentally fast car. Now, Toro Rosso had a bit of a nondescript weekend with Alexander Albon qualifying in 13th and Daniel Kvyat in 18th. In the race, Albon finished in 15th and Kvyat in 17th. Next, Williams, for the second time in 3 races, Williams finished in front of a non-Williams car, with George Russell again finishing ahead of an entire Kevin Magnussen. So that's good news at least. And I think the weirdest thing to happen all weekend long was the fact that Robert Kubica won the F1 official driver of the day contest. Now, this is a fan-voted competition, but, regardless of this, after finishing a whole 3 laps down, on the field and a lap behind his teammates, somehow I don't think Robert Kubica was the ideal candidate for the driver of the day of the Austrian Grand Prix. So yeah, a bit strange. And I guess since the official fan voted awards were ridiculous this week, I think it's time for me to rectify this by announcing the winners of our weekly TF1 show awards. The Pastor Maldonado Award for Most Dunderheaded Deed goes to Lewis Hamilton and Mercedes for Hamilton's ridiculous attempt to get out of the way of Kimi Raikkonen during qualifying. Hamilton drove straight off the track and Mercedes didn't tell him that Raikkonen was coming. This resulted in his 3rd place, which ended up being a 2nd place, grid penalty and robbing us of the Leclerc versus Hamilton versus Verstappen first lap drama that we all craved. Secondly, the Lewis Hamilton #Best Award this week goes to Valtteri Bottas. After Hamilton broke his front wing, Valtteri Bottas was able to, maintain his lead over Hamilton, and, Hamilton just wasn't able to catch up, despite the fact that during the first stint of the race, Hamilton did show the superior pace and was probably going to pressure Bottas for the rest of the race as well. Luckily, Valtteri Bottas survives to fight another day, and let's see if he can do better at Silverstone. Lastly, the Nico Hülkenberg Podium Award for Unluckiest Driver goes to Sebastian Vettel for getting reliability problems during qualifying at one of the few tracks where Ferrari is expected to have the upper hand. He drove well, but Ferrari is still winless in 2019. Shame. As always, congratulations to all the winners, and I hope they realize what an honor and a privilege it is to be even nominated for such an illustrious award. So the next race is in 2 weeks' time in Silverstone, and like every previous TF1 episode, we have many questions to keep us going over the coming fortnight. Will Pierre Gasly still drive for Red Bull in 2 weeks' time? Will Charles Leclerc ever win his first race? Will we be able to survive another weekend of Christian Horner's smug victory face after a race? Since I tell you, having to witness Christian Horner explaining why Verstappen is the son he never had almost ruined the entire brilliant race weekend for me. Anyways, I digress. There's much to ponder before the next race. So, dear listeners, that is it for another week of the TF1 show. Thanks so much for listening and subscribing, and please continue to do so if you enjoyed the episode. We are on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Castbox, Podbean, Stitcher, and many more. Also, follow me on Twitter, where my handle is @TF1Show, and on Instagram, where my handle is @TheTF1Show. It's been a delight to talk to you, and I'll see you next week for our next episode. Bye.